Hi, my name is Joe Kao, and in this video I'm going to be talking about my course Transformational Storytelling. Now, I've been a hypnotherapist and psychotherapist for coming up to 2 decades, and I've also got a background in theatre, improv, and voice work. And one of the things I've found over the years is that stories are a remarkably effective tool for helping people to make changes, for helping people to consider things from another perspective, for helping them to see their own problem from the outside in a way that's non-threatening, in a way where you can talk about something in another context, metaphorically, or use an example of someone else, and it allows them to reflect on what they've been dealing with, on the assumptions they've been making from the outside, being able to externalize a problem and being able to explore other possibilities and other solutions in a way that gives them the space to reflect, gives them the space to consider how that story that you've told them could be relevant to them, how the story that you've told them could be something that they could put to work in their own lives. So through telling stories, we're not always giving someone a set of step-by-step instructions. In fact, I think, and based on my experience of teaching this kind of work to people, that sometimes therapists and hypnotherapists can put too much pressure on themselves to find the right story. You know, we sometimes hear about these master therapists, master storytellers like the late great Milton H. Erickson, who would tell story after story hypnotically to his clients, and people would spontaneously change through listening to his stories. But it wasn't always that Erickson knew just the right story and just the right sequence of stories. It's more that when there's an overlap with what the client is dealing with the assumptions, the preconceptions, the patterns of the client's problem, when there's an overlap between that and a story that you can tell, that through telling that story, it begins to introduce other possibilities. It begins to introduce changes into the pattern of what they're dealing with. And when you do that multiple times, when you're reminded of how this story about this client somewhat resembles the person who you're working with, who's there in front of you, or when a metaphorical example or a parable or a fable comes to mind, through these stories, it takes the person's attention away from themselves for a little while into the story. But there's still that overlap between what they're dealing with and what's going on in the story. And through that shift in attention, changes can start to take place, somewhat spontaneously, somewhat outside of their conscious awareness, where through a sequence of stories and then through conversationally working with a person and exploring their issue, a problem can begin to dissolve. What had felt like a problem suddenly isn't there anymore. And stories are one of the key elements in being able to work with people. I highly recommend learning to introduce more stories into your work, to draw upon your own current repertoire of stories and to broaden and expand your repertoire of stories, because you'll find that as stories start to come to mind for you, when you're working with people, when you're working with groups, whether you're working with people one-to-one, that those stories become an integral part of how you communicate, of how you speak, where they just come to mind, like useful allies, useful friends that can support what you're saying by illustrative examples, by analogies, by metaphors that simply enrich your communication, that allow you to have more impact in how you communicate with others, and that allow people to take on board and to consider your ideas more fully and more deeply, because they are supported and elaborated upon through the stories that you've been telling, so that the ideas that are within those stories are something that stay with the person after the conversation, and they can mull it over in the back of their minds, and what's useful within that story can take root within them and produce changes sometimes that you'd never even consciously planned. That you can tell a story and the listener can find their own meaning in it, where there's just enough connection between the story and the issue, just enough overlap that the cogs can start turning within the back of someone's mind and they can have their own epiphanies. So this kind of work, transformational storytelling, is all about developing more ease and more confidence in your own ability to do this as a storyteller. We'll be talking about metaphors, we'll be talking about priming and seeding, and we'll be exploring how you can use your voice and your body language to express yourself through stories in a way that has resonance and impact in how you communicate with others. So if this sounds like something that you'd be interested in, you can find out more beneath this video, and it'd be great to have you as part of the course. Goodbye for now.